All right, so you guys send in a bunch of sources about Antarctica, and honestly, when I think of it, the first thing that pops into my head is just like miles and miles of ice, that
Hmm.
kind of classic image. But then I started going through what you all sent in, and I gotta say, there's this one thing about Antarctica that really flipped my whole perspective.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You say desert, and most folks picture, well, I don't know, like a scorching sun, maybe some sand dunes, cactuses, that kind of thing. But the thing is, and this is where it gets really interesting, Antarctica is, scientifically speaking, the biggest desert on the entire planet.
Wait, 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 hold on. Back up a sec. A desert? I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that. I mean, come on. The place is covered in ice and snow. How can that possibly be a desert?
Okay, so the key here is how scientists actually define a desert. It's not about how hot or cold it is, it's about how much, or rather how little, rain a place gets every year. What really matters is that yearly rainfall or precipitation being super low. That's the core of it. Now, Antarctica, yeah, it's got tons of ice, but it doesn't actually get a whole lot of new snow falling down. Most of the moisture that makes it to the continent comes as snow, not as liquid rain. And because it's so incredibly cold, the air just can't hold much moisture anyway. So the snowfall ends up being pretty minimal across a lot of the continent.
Whoa, okay, so it's like, even though it looks like it's got endless water, frozen solid, it's not actually getting much fresh snow. It's kind of trippy when you think about it. It really shifts your whole idea of what makes a desert a desert.
Absolutely. And that whole idea of it being super dry really ties into the next big thing about Antarctica.
Hmm.
It's absolutely insane climate. We all know it's cold down there, obviously, but when you look at the numbers, it paints a picture of a world that's just unlike anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we know it's cold, but just how cold is cold down there?
Well, put it this way, Antarctica takes the cake for being the coldest, the windiest, and the driest continent on the entire Earth. That's quite a combo, right? The coldest temperature ever recorded there was -89.2 degrees Celsius. That was back in 1983, and it's almost impossible to even grasp how frigid that really
Oh
is.
man, just hearing you say that number gives me chills. And I thought the average temperature along the coast, where it's supposed to be a little warmer, was bad. But even that's still a bone-chilling negative 10 degrees Celsius. Way, way below freezing.
Yeah, and don't forget about the wind. It's not just the cold, it's the wind that really makes Antarctica what it is. The wind speeds down there are just ridiculous. We're talking winds that can reach over 350 kilometers per hour. Can you imagine the force of winds like that constantly battering you? We're talking way beyond hurricane force here, and it can go on and on across those vast open spaces.
Man, that just sounds brutal. Seriously harsh. Okay, so we've talked about the crazy climate, but let's shift it gears a bit and talk about the geography of this place. We all know Antarctica is massive, but there are some details about how it's all put together that are just wild.
Totally. So, yeah, it's the fifth largest continent, but the fact that it's almost double the size of Australia really gives you a sense of just how huge it is. And tying back to what we were talking about earlier with the whole desert thing, a big chunk of that land, like more than 5 million square miles along the coastline, is all ice sheet. We're not just talking about a little layer of ice on top of land, it's this gigantic slab of frozen water.
But here's where things get really, really interesting. Underneath all that ice, there's something you'd never expect at a place like this. An active volcano. We're talking about Mount Erebus, and finding out about that in the sources just blew my mind.
And what's even cooler about Mount Erebus isn't just that it's a volcano in this land of ice, it's what's going on inside it. You see, Mount Erebus has something that's found nowhere else on Earth. Persistent molten lava lakes inside its crater. Just picture that contrast for a second. A lake of scorching hot liquid rock just churning away inside this volcano, surrounded by nothing but frozen wilderness as far as the eye can see. It's a mind-blowing image.
Seriously, it just shatters any simple image you might have of Antarctica. It's not just a uniform block of ice. There's fire down there, too. Now, speaking of names, even the name Antarctica itself has a pretty interesting story, and it actually connects right back to the Arctic.
Oh, yeah. The name Antarctica literally means opposite to the Arctic. It comes from the Greek word Antarctique, which basically tells you everything you need to know. And even though both the Arctic and Antarctic are known for being icy, what's underneath the ice is totally different. If you drilled down through the ice in the Arctic, you'd eventually hit the Arctic Ocean. It's basically just a thick layer of sea ice floating on water. But Antarctica, under all that ice, there's actual land, earth, rock, soil. It's a real continent through and through.
Right, that's a crucial difference. It's not just frozen ocean, it's a solid landmass just buried under a whole lot of ice.
Yeah.
So given how harsh the climate is, what kind of life can actually survive in a place like this?
Well, the sources you sent paint a pretty clear picture. Not a whole lot, at least not in terms of variety. Most animals just aren't built to handle the extreme cold, the crazy winds, and the dryness. But the creatures that do live there have evolved some pretty amazing ways to survive.
Yeah, I was reading about the whales and seals that hang out in the waters around Antarctica, which makes sense, I guess, since the water's a bit warmer than being up on the ice. But what really blew me away were the emperor penguins. They actually live on the land and ice all year round, and there are millions of them, almost 5 million.
And the fact that they can not only survive, but actually breed in those conditions is incredible. It speaks volumes about how well they've adapted to that environment. And even their food, the fish they eat, highlights another fascinating bit of biology. Lots of those fish have something called antifreeze proteins in their blood. It's kind of like nature's own antifreeze. These proteins actually latch onto ice crystals in the fish's blood, stopping them from getting bigger and causing damage. It's how they can live in water that's practically freezing solid.
That's so cool. And then there are those ice fish, which honestly sound kind of spooky. The sources describe them as having this ghostly white look, and it's because their blood doesn't have any hemoglobin, no hemoglobin at all. So how in the world do they get oxygen to survive?
That's a great question, and your sources actually offer a pretty clear explanation. The thing is, because the water in Antarctica is so unbelievably cold, it can actually hold way more dissolved gases, and that includes oxygen. So even without hemoglobin, these icefish can absorb enough oxygen straight through their gills and even their skin. It's a super specialized adaptation to the extreme cold, a perfect example of nature finding a very specific solution to a very specific problem.
Wow, it's like nature's own super specialized engineering project.
Yeah.
What about plants, though? I mean, can anything even grow in those conditions?
It's tough. The sources are pretty consistent on this. Plant life in Antarctica is super scarce. You've got the lack of sunlight for a good part of the year. The soil isn't great. And of course, it's freezing all the time. It all adds up to a really rough environment for anything to try to take root and thrive.
Makes sense. So we've talked about the animals and the plants, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
What about us humans? Who goes to Antarctica and what are they doing there?
Well, Antarctica is the least populated continent, and there are no permanent residents. No one actually lives there full time. Most of the people you'd find there are scientists and researchers from all over the world. They're doing all sorts of important research, from studying the unique animals and how the climate's changing to looking into the Earth's history that's preserved in the ice.
Well, it's not just scientists, right? I was reading that there are actually thousands of tourists going to Antarctica every year. That's pretty wild. I guess people are drawn to that pristine, untouched landscape, and of course the chance to see those incredible animals up close.
That's right. It's becoming more and more of a tourist destination, although it's still a pretty remote and challenging place to get to. But yeah, no one actually lives there permanently. And that unique situation is largely thanks to the Antarctic Treaty of 1961.
Right, the Antarctic Treaty. That's super important for understanding Antarctica's place in the world.
Absolutely. It was signed by 53 different countries, and basically it says that Antarctica is for peaceful purposes only. The main focus is on international scientific research and cooperation. It ensures that no single country owns Antarctica and that its potential resources aren't exploited. It's all about sharing it for the sake of science and peace. And speaking of science, one of your sources mentions McMurdo Station, which is the biggest research base down there. Over 1,000 scientists work there during the Antarctic summer, which just goes to show how much scientific work is going on in that amazing environment.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Now, this one really caught me off guard. Did you know that Antarctica is actually a prime spot for finding meteorites? It seems kind of counterintuitive with all that ice and snow, but it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, it's that contrast that makes it so great for meteorite hunting. Because the meteorites are usually dark, they really pop against all that white snow and ice. They're pretty easy to spot. Plus, the fact that it's so cold and dry down there means that the meteorites stay in really good condition. It's like a natural deep freeze for space rocks.
I love that analogy. And one last thing that really struck me. NASA actually uses the extreme conditions in Antarctica to test equipment and technology for missions to Mars and even deeper into space. That really shows you just how unique and challenging that environment is.
You got it. The extreme cold, the fact that researchers are isolated for long periods of time in those remote stations, the difficulties of working with complex equipment in such a dry and harsh environment. It all adds up to a pretty good simulation of what we might face on other planets like Mars. It's like a training ground right here on Earth for our future adventures in space.
So there you have it. Antarctica is so much more than just a frozen wasteland. It breaks our usual ideas about deserts. It's got active volcanoes hiding under miles of ice, and it's home to some of those incredible life forms on the planet, all adapted to this unbelievably cold and harsh environment. It's a place full of contradictions and fascinating science, and it's a far cry from that simple image of endless ice that we often have in our minds.
And that leads to something I'd like you all to think about. We've talked about how Antarctica is governed by this international treaty dedicated to peace and science. So, with all that in mind, what do you see as the future of this extraordinary continent? It's a place that seems desolate, but is actually incredibly important to science, and it's facing the challenges of climate change along with the rest of the planet. What do you think lies ahead for Antarctica? It's a question that's worth pondering.